Outside of Datadog, AI products are here to stay in what is maybe more of a flash in the pan. And at Datadog, we're just trying to make sure that we're supporting all of the core AI solutions so that people can keep track of how they're performing for them. We're trying to monitor all the most critical systems for a company. We need to make sure that we're integrating with all of the key critical systems. And so staying on top of that and making sure people know that we've got a solution for these new applications or platforms that they're using.
Welcome to another episode of the Future of Marketing podcast. Today, we're so excited to have Sara Varni here as our guest. Sara has been CMO at 3 of the most iconic developer-first companies that have existed in this industry: Salesforce, Twilio, Attentive, and now she's at Datadog, where she's Chief Marketing Officer. And I think that she is particularly special in sort of our run of guests on this show because she has innovated so much on the playbook of how you really market to developers while at the same time figuring out how to sell into enterprise. So today we're really excited to talk about how she has been doing this for a very swift moving product and the new tools and tactics that she's bringing to bear on everything that they're doing at Datadog on the team. So Sara, welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And I think we'll start with a little bit of your career journey because so much of probably what you bring to your day-to-day now has come from what you've seen, what you've confronted at these past roles. And the first one that comes to mind is Salesforce, just because you referred to it as such an excellent training ground for what it is that you were doing in your role today. So wanted to hear a little bit more about how marketing across the many different products you had exposure to there kind of laddered up to what you consider to be your approach today.
Yeah, well, I was really lucky to join Salesforce. When I joined the company, we were about 1,100 people at the time. We had one core product, which was Salesforce automation, and still their largest product, or actually, I don't know, maybe Service Cloud is edged it out now, but at the time, it was their main product. And I just was super lucky to be there in the sense that it was a company that was still getting off the ground, growing really quickly and expanding super quickly. And so I was there for about 11 years, but I had 3 really different roles. And so I got exposure to ISVs through working on the App Exchange and getting that off the ground. The Apple App Store didn't even exist when the App Exchange launched.
So this was pretty pioneering at the time.
Absolutely. It was like the wild, wild west of cloud. And we were working with ISVs, trying to convince them to bring their on-prem solutions,
Was that a net new behavior to get folks to be like, I'm going to build on top of this and then market through this new thing?
Absolutely. And I think the Salesforce customer base was significant, but it was nowhere near what it was today. So to get people to really kind of bet on our platform, which was pretty early days, was, you had to really kind of think about how you made that value prop work for them. So that was, super exciting. And that being my first job in software, I also got to learn about all the different categories of software. So it was a unique role in that sense. And then I had 2 other roles at Salesforce. I worked for an acquisition called Desk.com. And then ultimately, I moved to work for the flagship product for Sales Cloud for my last few years there. So 3 totally different roles taught me absolutely different things and had to learn how to flex different muscles. And I think that helped prep me to be more of a general marketer and leader, long term.
Did you set out intending to be a developer-facing marketer?
No, absolutely not. And, when I got the call about the Twilio role, I just, was really happy at Salesforce. I had a ton of good friends and colleagues that I had worked with over the years and, was happy in my role. But, the idea to be a CMO and to work for more of a consumer-leaning product was probably what initially drew me to Twilio. And I was very upfront through the interview process, like, hey, I haven't really marketed to developers directly. I know that I've had some exposure through my work on App Exchange and working on our platform. But when it comes to true developer marketing, I'm really green. And they were very open to it, and knowing that they had a good kind of system in place already on the developer marketing side, and where they were looking was really to expand to enterprise marketing, which is something I knew how to do fairly well at that point.
Yeah.
And I think if we talk about your time at Twilio, but also the time now at Datadog, you led marketing during pivotal changes. I think, as mobile was becoming big and now with AI, how is that affecting the role then and the role now? And do you see any similarities and differences?
I mean, I think for when it comes to developer marketing, I always say or people have said to me in the past, I won't say I coined it, but I definitely repeat it, that, rule number one of marketing developers is not to market to developers. And you always have to make sure that whatever you're presenting to them, content-wise, event-wise, any sort of interaction is useful to them. And so there's a balance, because you want to be talking about what's in the zeitgeist today and what's really important, whether that's mobile or AI. But you also need to talk about your products at the end of the day. And so you need to figure out a way of, okay, what's the intersection of these two things? And if you're building products that are not, currently relevant, you're going to have a problem anyway. So it's like, how do you find that intersection of what's relevant now with what, you're building, and try to lean in on those topics to really engage them.
How do you toe that line? Do you have examples?
At Twilio, for example, WhatsApp for Business was just coming online, and we knew that was a good opportunity and something, a vector that, our average developer would be really interested in. So we made sure we worked really closely with WhatsApp to, be prepared for their launch and rollout, and, made sure we had all the right, and this is not like, hey, what's our pitch deck? This is, hey, do we have the right documentation? Hey, do we have the right content that's going to enable and be helpful to developers to get them up and running on the solution versus, some hardcore pitch. And so we always try to kind of be out in front and think about, all right, what's 3 months ahead of us? And let's make sure that we've got, we're building this content today so that we're not caught flat-footed on some trend that really takes off.
I think that a lot of the conversation that I've been sort of hearing out there in the zeitgeist also is like, how much are developers going to respond to the bigger story arcs of what's going on in the market right now, or like their place in sort of the story of AI that's unfolding, versus just talk about your product and what they can build with your product? And have you come to a point of view on like what the balance between those things should be?
I mean, I think at Datadog, for example, I think people are trying to figure out what products outside of Datadog, AI products are here to stay, and what is maybe more of a flash in the pan. And at Datadog, we're just trying to make sure that we're supporting all of the core AI solutions so that people can, keep track of how they're performing for them. And I think it goes back to, what I was just saying. If you're not thinking about if you're only kind of thinking within your four walls, sort of like, and only, hey, we do this really well, we're going to continue to do really well, you might, look up at one point, you're going to look up at one point and realize you're not relevant to the market anymore. So especially for a company like Datadog, where we're trying to monitor all the most critical systems for a company, we need to make sure that we're integrating with all of the key critical systems. And so we try to just make sure that we're similar to the WhatsApp example, staying on top of that and making sure people know that we've got a solution for these new applications or platforms that they're using.
And I think when you market to developers, and I think both at Datadog and Twilio, you market to the developer, but also the executive. How does that differ? And what are things that are similar channels, but also things that are very different? I think that's something that I think a lot of companies struggle with. They do one or the other really well.
I think you have to think about what the right altitude is to speak with that audience. Like a day-to-day hands-on keyboard user of Datadog is going to want to know the nitty-gritty of how our different offerings work. Whereas an executive who might oversee a number of teams who are using Datadog, they're not going to know the intricacies of a particular product or go down a rabbit hole that a HOK hands-on keyboard individual might. And so I think you have to think about what's important to them. I always try to get my team in the mindset of, I try to make it very concrete and specific. Like, hey, if Joe Smith, our executive buyer, is sitting in his board meeting or sitting in his QBR, what questions is that person getting? Or what's keeping them up at night? And then all right, then let's talk about the things that Datadog does to help them, succeed or get through that line of questioning.
Yeah, it's sort of like a split between who's the champion and who's the buyer. And I'm curious how much time and effort you invest on the champion cultivation side of the equation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that if your champions are losing faith in your product or not seeing the value in it, that's going to be disastrous for a developer-focused platform. And so I think you always need to be, again, helping them to get the most out of what you're delivering and continuing to innovate so that you're keeping pace with what they need from your products. Of course, like you can't ignore the buyer, and you have to make sure that you're not doing things that are going to be completely out of line with how people consume a product like yours, just because the champions love it. But I think like your core hands-on keyboard day-to-day user has got to be a main focus, or else you're going to lose your way with a developer-focused platform.
I love hearing you talk about sort of the enterprise buyer to champion dichotomy, and would love to dig into maybe some examples from Twilio in particular, where you ran campaigns that really got at how to tell the right story to both sides of that equation.
Yeah, so a lot of the work that we did over the time I was at Twilio was really connecting the dots between what was happening on the ground at the hands-on keys level with the economic buyers. And one thing that we did that I thought was helpful to get an account to see, all right, this is the power that Twilio could deliver, was a program that we did called Enterprise Hackathons. And so we would go on site we couldn't do it for every account. It's not the most scalable program, but for accounts that we wanted to build longer term relationships with, we'd bring our developer evangelists on site. We would teach their developers, for a half day on here's the basics of how to use Twilio, whether it was like setting up alerts and notifications or setting up whatever kind of general, we knew the vein of use case they wanted to play in. And then we'd have a mini hackathon for the day. And at the end of the day, we'd bring everyone's managers into the room and we'd do like an American Idol style hackathon presentation. And then we'd see all of these proofs of concept that otherwise would have probably taken us 6 months, 12 months to get off the ground. And so that was a really, I wouldn't say easy, but it was a really powerful way to get both the developer and the enterprise buyer on the same page.
How did you get buy-in for something like that? Like, how did you convince the company to like allot a day for something like this?
We would use our account teams to kind of build those relationships over time. And we could also see in our data where we saw people tinkering around. And so obviously you can't run an enterprise playbook on a developer funnel. That's just like not what you want to do.
Yeah.
But again, going back to like trying to help people where we see people needing help, we would, start to see people doing a certain amount of activity on the platform. And we would, try to unblock them however we could through documentation or quick start guides or, content that we felt would like ease whatever, it would help them along the part of the journey they were trying to get through. And so, just monitoring that activity and being close to the account teams, we would have the account teams engage when we thought like, all right, they've got some sort of project or something meaningful going on here, and get the buy-in that way.
So of course we would be remiss if we didn't talk about how the rolling changes in AI are affecting your role at Datadog right now. You've noted that AI isn't about cutting jobs, it's about improving the product experience and boosting efficiency on the team. I'm curious, when you think about some of the top ways that that's manifested, what comes to mind?
Well, we've definitely tried to have an AI first mindset across all of our different teams, whether you're on brand or product marketing or growth. And we've had a couple different ways that we've engaged people across the team. More of an opt-in route has been an AI council that we've stood up. So we have people who have raised their hands across the team, meet monthly, share best practices, share new things they're doing. And it's been really interesting to see who has raised their hand. And it's been a wide cross-section. It's not any one sub-department of marketing. And then more kind of tops down, we had an AI hackathon team-wide. This is like 2 months ago now. And we had 20 projects submitted at the end. People submitted ideas, and then you could sign up for one of the teams for the ideas that were submitted. And it's a range. It's everything from like logo resizing, which doesn't, on its face seem...
Anyone who's had to resize a bunch of logos knows.
Yeah, it just it adds up. And so stuff like that too. And now I'm going down the logo path, but figuring out what logos are actually referenceable.
Oh my God, that was...
Yeah, and doing that across different, because you've got some of it in Salesforce, you have some of it in spreadsheets,
Totally.
You've got a bunch of different places where that lives, you have some of it in your actual contracts. And so kind of having a quick way to scan all of those to see, all right, can I use it in a webinar? Can I use it in an event? So stuff like that. Ask by ask doesn't seem like a big drain on productivity, but when you start totaling up 20 minutes here, 20 minutes there, it's huge.
I have dealt with that problem before.
Yeah. So those are a couple of examples we've been thinking about. We normally have a communication plan that's pretty in-depth for every big conference we do or big third-party event house from a marketing perspective. And so, that's
it's
something
like a punch list.
Yeah, like, hey, here are the key messages for this event. Here are the things that we're most excited about. And that just takes a product marketer probably 3 to 4 hours every event that we do. And we did over 150 events last year. So that would probably have one of those docs attached to them. So thinking about how we automate more of that. So there's some really good ideas that came out of it. And, I always think the true success of a hackathon is how many projects actually live on. And I'd say of the 20, like 16 are still alive and well. So it's been great. And it's something we're going to do every year now.
Wow. How do you think about content production when it comes to this? And are you thinking about how to develop a set of standards around when AI is utilized for content production, where it can be more helpful than other applications?
Honestly, don't use a ton of AI for content today. And I think that's a place that we certainly could get better. I do think going back to marketing to a developer audience, we want to be really careful that it doesn't feel like AI-driven copy. And so there's some kind of checks and balances you've got to have there. But, I do think we are, when it comes to things like social posts, which are basically lifting something from a body of content that already exists and just summarizing it, we definitely try to use it on for avenues like that or programs like that, where it's the core content has been written by us and feels authentic to our audience. We're just trying to save time from, using all of the different kind of promo or creating all the different promo copy, which again, stacks up if you're doing it across
so much can be recycled.
Yes.
A lot of people talk about the sensitivity that they feel consumers might have to AI generated content in marketing, but there's not a lot of discourse around how developers are reacting to AI generated content. So I'm curious just to hear some of your observations about how that audience is reacting.
I wouldn't claim to be an expert on it, but I do think all of the things I share when I talk about marketing developers are pretty broadly applicable to marketing in general. People don't generally want to be sold to. They want to get to what they're looking for and kind of move on with their day. And so I think, those same kind of concepts apply to how developers are consuming AI generated content. I've seen a bunch in my own personal feed for Instagram over the New Year's season. A lot of content creators are no more AI slop, that's their big thing. And I think developers would probably say the same thing. Whether it's my, whatever fashion influencer saying that on Instagram or a site reliability engineer, they probably have the same sentiment. But that being said, these tools can be super powerful if you can leverage them in the right way. And so I think I'm trying to think about, all right, for all the channels that we have where we've got summaries of this content somehow, how can we streamline some of that process? Because even that alone, stacked up on multiple social posts a day or multiple promos a day can, really add up. And that's time you can get back on the clock to do something more high impact.
Definitely.
And I think one of the interesting things you said was that you did so many events last year. And I think there's this people, because there's so much AI content, the importance of the human relationship has become bigger. And we're seeing this re-emergence of events being everywhere. Is that something that you've seen? Are you doubling down on events? Are you planning to do even more next year?
We definitely see events as a powerful tool to get out in front of our customers. I think showing them kind of what the product does, getting them hands-on has always been at Datadog, pre my time from the beginning of Datadog has been a really powerful approach for the company. I think one thing that we are evolving within Datadog, just given where we are as a company now, is doing more first-party events and customer-centric events. We have 30 plus products now that our customer base could be using, and we want to make sure that they know about the ones that are going to be relevant or helpful to them. So we've been establishing more of a first party roadshow where we go to our core our top 10 cities worldwide. We do workshops. We bring in members of our community to share what's been working for them and try to make it very much like a local gathering so that people can hear from others, hear what's working, and also learn about all these new things that we have that we think are really exciting for them.
I think one of the things I struggled when at Branch, I was doing a lot of events, was like showing the rest of the executive team the ROI. It's like actually one of the reasons I started Upside, because I believed that our events had great ROI, but it was just so hard to show that they were actually successful. How do you measure the ROI of events, and how do you know which events are successful versus not?
Yeah, well, with all of our marketing programs, I generally like to look at what our pipeline to spend ratio is. So for every dollar we're investing, what is coming back in terms of pipeline. And you can kind of look at events side by side and say, all right, well, this was a 10-to-1 pipe to spend. This was a 2-to-1 pipe to spend. And you might still not throw out the 2-to-1 if it's like, hey, yeah, but we touched some new logos that we don't have access to yet, and this is going to be a longer term play. But we generally keep an eye on that metric to make sure that we're not just burning money or throwing money at events because we think that that's been our playbook forever. So, but we do have we're very methodical in how we follow up with everyone. We make sure that we are not leaving anything on the table, and so I think that it's a pretty. We have a really solid formula in terms of engaging as many people as we can at an event, getting them to our booth, getting them to talk to our experts, and then making sure that the follow-up's really solid too.
Yeah, that's so important. So I think that sometimes if that doesn't happen, that makes sense. And I think the other interesting thing is that you have this land and expand model, meaning like a lot of pipeline comes from customers and you do a lot of customer marketing. When you think about like ROI, do you like split that between like completely new, or how much of your marketing is to existing customers to get them to like buy more versus like completely like net new pipeline?
I mean, I think it's obviously evolved over the years. As we were starting out, we were exclusively focused on new business because we didn't have as many customers to sell to. And now, like I mentioned, as our customer base has gotten much bigger, we're really trying to make sure, hey, do people know that we have this new product to do X, Y, and Z? And so I don't know that I've got like a perfect percentage in my head of how it works, but we do have pipeline targets that we set regionally, and we set at a segment level, and now increasingly looking even at the product level. And so we need to make sure what's the right mix of events, webinars, content that we need to deliver to hit those respective targets. And for some products, it might be much more of a customer add-on play. For some, it's our core 3 pillars products, infra, logs, APM, where we'd want to go and make sure that we're hitting more of the third-party event circuit to get those new logos in.
Yeah, I'm curious, do you feel that you're at this juncture where you're kind of expanding outside of the concentric inner circles of technology and into like a bigger sort of playing field? And if so, how is discovery of Datadog and exactly the understanding of what you can do for people sort of shifting in what you need to do?
I mean, I think we certainly are. And that's what drew me to Datadog as a company in the first place. I love that it's a broad platform with a lot of different applications and a lot of different people who could potentially use it. I just think that makes your job day to day as a marketer very interesting. That's what kept me at a company like Salesforce for 11 years, because I had 3 different jobs marketing to 3 totally different audiences. So but back more to your question directly, yeah, we definitely have to think about, all right, there's our core kind of I wouldn't say legacy, but our where we started out as a company and where we started selling. And then there are new personas and new categories that we're approaching where we can't just expect the existing Datadog user to tap the shoulder of their colleague and that to work. And so we have to think about, all right, how do we, for some of these new categories we're entering, how do we think about it as if we were a brand new company just selling in that space? While still obviously leveraging the machine that already is Datadog. But I think that sometimes that takes some reprogramming of some of the things we've done as a marketing team for years. And you kind of have to be like, all right, yes, I know we've got this particular email program that looks like this, but let's think about who we're selling to now. They just want the facts. It's got to be very simple. Let's just get them to the data they need. And it doesn't have to be super stylized. It doesn't have to be all the bells and whistles. It needs to be kind of devoid of marketing speak and says
this is what it is.
Yeah, for, for certain buyers,
Yeah.
And so that, so it takes a little bit of reprogramming sometimes.
What are the best top of funnel efforts that you've seen for like sort of creating that net new awareness out there in these new markets?
I mean, I think having a really strong content engine and again, like jumping in on the kind of momentum of what's happening in that category broadly, having a unique point of view out there has worked. And we were talking about before the call started, but I mean, I think the challenge with developer marketing sometimes is that you have to have a lot of lines in the water. It's not like any one thing is going to be a silver bullet. And so I think, at Twilio, for example, when I would work with the developer evangelists, we'd have like 70 to 80% of their time carved out for like bread and butter work that focused on Twilio's kind of core APIs or Twilio's core business. But the remaining 20 to 30% were just really for anything that was happening that was relevant more broadly in the space. And that could be anything from like the WhatsApp for Business example I was talking about, but that could be about like an IoT sourdough starter. I remember that was one of our blog posts during COVID. And, the point was just to like, stay interesting, stay relevant, stay memorable. And, I think that's kind of the balance you've got to strike.
This episode is brought to you by Upside. If you've ever tried to answer the question, what actually drove that deal? Or where should I invest next quarter? You know how messy B2B intelligence really is. Upside is a revenue intelligence platform built by engineers and marketers who spent over a decade in the trenches at companies like Branch, Outreach, and MuleSoft. We got tired of building internal tools just to make sense of our own data, so we built a platform we always wish we had. Upside uses AI to unlock and organize the messy data in calls, transcripts, Salesforce fields, marketing automation tools, and beyond to help you answer the questions you never could before. Questions like what actually drove a specific deal and how brand awareness helped influence the buying group, or the reasons you are winning or losing. Better insights, smarter decisions, stronger outcomes. If you're ready to act with confidence rather than guessing, head to Upside.tech to learn more. How do you find those content writers? I think I've always struggled. I think even at Branch, we had one person who, as my co-founder, to find a person that stays on top of things and like writes about it. It's just, I found it very hard to find those people.
Yeah, I mean, it wasn't easy, but our leader of our developer evangelism team at Twilio, this individual named Ricky Robinette, was fantastic. And he did a fantastic job building a really kind of diverse team that came from a bunch of different backgrounds that, just was wired to think about how to produce content that was going to be engaging and bring people in. And also people that were good at presenting and getting on stage and being at a high volume of events year round. And so it kind of works hand in hand. If you are a good presenter, you're normally a pretty good storyteller. It doesn't mean it translates perfectly to written long form content. But he was able to find some really excellent people that would just kind of think of these, just be on the kind of forefront of what they thought developers would care about. And some of them were huge hits, like I said, and some of them were, you had to have a lot of lines in the water to see what sticks.
Placed,
yeah,
right?
That's very good.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's some interesting conversation around like, is it good to hire former journalists? Is it good to hire like these kind of, I hate to use the word kids, but youthful folks who are extremely online? Curious, like what you think the role of like bringing in some of this element just to stay on that like bleeding edge of the conversation.
I mean, I think it just totally depends on what your audience is and who you're trying to market to. If like you're trying to talk to developers, it's better, you better be, not always, but like 90% of the time, you're going to come across more legit if you're a developer yourself and can really be in their shoes. I think if you're in, supporting a product where data is very important or kind of the broader ecosystem is important. I've seen places where people hire economists that are really good at harvesting data and like finding the right kind of soundbite or like Malcolm Gladwell kind of angle that will hook people in. We used to actually do a fair amount of that at Twilio with some of our kind of state of reports and things where we were trying to market actually more to that executive buyer to say, hey, here are some of the trends in telecom that you need to be aware of. So I think it just kind of depends. I don't know that there's, again, like one profile. You can't like search on XYZ in LinkedIn, but, I do think that it takes some thinking outside of the box and having an eye for that talent. I don't know that I always have it, but I've definitely seen some incredible people, both in my time at Twilio and at Datadog, who have been able to find those people.
And lastly, on the discovery piece, like obviously with AI being such in the conversation right now, how are you seeing, I guess, what people are talking about with the erosion of SEO sort of giving way to AEO, GEO? Is that overstated right now in sort of like the day-to-day application? How are you seeing that all shape up?
I think the same general rules apply, like build relevant content that's going to be useful to people and you will show up well in LLMs. I think that you have to be mindful of certain channels that are weighted a little bit more heavily in LLMs. And we were talking about this before we got on, but like channels like Reddit now have increased. I mean, they've always been important, but they're increasingly important in this, world of LLMs. And, going back to the developer audience specifically, you also have to be careful not to manipulate that, because that's just like, again, another way to completely destroy your credibility overnight. So I think that there are probably tempting avenues for today's marketer to kind of manipulate the system, but you always still have to be mindful of what does your customer care about? How do they want to consume content from you? What will turn them off to make sure that you don't erode their trust?
Some of these fundamentals of just like, is this quality? Do people need this?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Sort of moving down funnel, curious about this new philosophy around aligning sales and marketing on one pipeline and making sure that there's all that connective tissue. How is that shaped up at Datadog in your experience?
Yeah, I love that it's a new philosophy. Like
It's not new. It's not.
well, no, but
Should
I mean,
I
it's
re-ask
no. I actually don't. I think it's like at Salesforce, it was like so ingrained in the culture there, and everyone had. We called it the 4 horsemen, and we had these, a sales target, an SDR target, a marketing target, and a channel target. And everyone had to hit their target, and it was, reported all the way up to the CEO. And I was surprised going to other companies that wasn't always well established, and it was more new. So, at Datadog, we definitely have that structure now, and it's great to have joint targets for, as you can imagine, for a host of different reasons. I think it's just great to get everyone on the same page to say, hey, here's what we expect sales to deliver. Here's what we expect marketing to deliver. It's also good to just think about regionally where you are from a maturity standpoint. So if we think about a newer market, I think a mistake I made at Twilio is I said, hey, all right, let's apply whenever it was, 2019 playbook that has been working for Twilio in North America. Let's just apply the same one to London. That'll work. And that was the wrong thing to do. I needed to apply like or to the UK. I needed to apply like the, 2013 playbook to the UK, because the brand was just not as well known. And so I think setting joint targets at the beginning of the year lets you have those trade-off conversations like, hey, marketing is going to be responsible for more in some of these emerging markets where we're not as well known. Whereas in a more mature market, sales will take on, more of that burden. And so it creates a great platform to have those trade-off conversations and to kind of be all in it together. And I always stress to my marketers, like, no victory laps if everyone's not hitting their targets. Like, I don't want us to be, if we're way in the green and sales is way in the red, something's wrong. Either, the targets are off, there's just something that's not working, because they normally should generally kind of move together. And so I try to make sure that my team really sees it as us all being in the same boat. And, we're not going to all celebrate until everyone's really hitting their targets. And that way, I think it creates less friction. It's not like, oh, what have you done for me lately, marketing? Or what have you, sales, why aren't you following up with my leads? It's more of a like, no, these are our joint goals together, and we're going to, figure out how we hit them.
When you are thinking about aligning marketing and sales on the same pipeline, like how do you help people understand the anatomy of how deals are being won, like how things are moving through, like truly tactically in terms of team comms, et cetera? I'm so curious about that.
Yeah, we have a pretty strict criteria in terms of what marketing will get credit for. And so, if a marketing activity happens, we want to make sure that there's some sort of meaningful sales engagement before, like, there's a meeting or something that happens within a respectable amount of time right after for us to genuinely get credit for it. So we try to make our model as strict as possible so that it's credible and that people are not like, oh my God, they're just making up their numbers. So that's one thing. But we also go back, we tweak our attribution model here and there every year just to make sure that it's still working and that it's in line with reality. But then we'll go back and we do a lot of surveying of AEs and say, hey, we're attached to this deal. Do you remember marketing actually being involved in it? Do you remember them and so we'll try and have that report card for us too to make sure that we're not overstating what our contribution is. So those are two kind of things at the data level. And then more anecdotally, increasingly we're starting to look at larger customers because sometimes someone will be learning about Datadog, using it in a limited capacity, and then over time that account will continue to grow and use more products and do more and more. And so I always like to, I've seen companies like Google do this. We did it at Twilio, but these kind of anatomy of a deal slides where you say, all right, at Twilio we'd see a developer kind of playing around, one or two developers kind of playing around, and we'd see them go to an event, then we'd see them go to some conference, and then the size of the opportunity would shoot up. And so I think sometimes it's not going to work out perfectly into your attribution roles all the time, but it shows sales and it shows other people that are not in marketing, like how all these touches over time really can add up and be meaningful to that long-term relationship. I don't know if you guys have had similar experience.
I mean, I built a tool that does that.
Oh, there we go.
I think that's why she's laughing, because we use AI to look through everything and come up with like a summary, but we also show the journey on. So that's why she was smiling.
Well, also at Notion, we devoted a lot of time to how the deal was won and like all hands meetings, et cetera, just so that people could have that visibility.
I think it's hard sometimes to know, especially when there's very large deals, like $1 million, $2 billion deals, and there were like 1,000 touch points, like which ones were important, and there's usually more than one.
Right.
I think the other thing that I find interesting, I think a lot of old AI companies right now are like, going after the individuals, and you can go and sign up really easily and start playing with it. But I think they're struggling to go from that to selling into an enterprise deal. And I know you've done some of that at Twilio, and it's like an old story, but now it's being like rewritten, and a lot of this new AI wave is seeing that as a challenge. Do you have any advice on how to like look at like signals into usage, individual usage, and turn those into potential like enterprise deals?
I think at Twilio I think it just depends on how your platform's consumed, but at Twilio, we did a lot of work to analyze how people were moving through their engagement with the platform. And we had a particular metric called PA10, which was meant that I think someone was had done at least 10 API calls against the platform, something. I think that was generally it. Don't quote me. At that point, we knew that there was probably something more significant happening. And so, we would try to engage them either through content or through personal outreach, depending on the size of the account, to, again, reach out, offer help, not in a pushy way, but like, hey, we see you're trying to do X, Y, and Z. Is there any way we could help you? And that's a way that we were able to direct our sales team in an efficient way so they were just chasing everything, but also keep that, trust and credibility intact. Approach the customer from a point of helping them and not trying to just hack the next product.
That makes sense. I think it's a very fine balance you have to walk, and it's a challenging. Yeah.
And you have to be really disciplined about it. And we would have to work with our sales team to make sure that they weren't just kind of dipping into that funnel and trying to harvest anything that was there, because most enterprising salespeople would, try and find new leads that way. So.
Do you think as we look towards the future, there's this blend of like marketing and PLG, and more companies, I think, in the CI wave are becoming like it's basically product-led growth. Do you think that that's going to continue, or do you think there's still going to be a place for, pure enterprise marketing?
I mean, I think it completely depends on the nature of your product. Like, how easy is it to get up and running and to try out what you're selling and see the value right away? I think that's where PLG can really sing. I think if you have a complicated product that takes implementation and takes time to kind of get up and running, it's going to be harder. And they could say there's products that are bought and products that are sold. And I think if you have a product that is going to take more explanation and more kind of build out of a custom proof of concept, like there's always going to be a need for an enterprise selling motion for that.
How do you see the breakdown at Datadog right now in terms of like how much you're devoting to PLG versus sales assist?
I think that the nature of what we do as a platform will always lend more towards PLG. And that's where we're all, again, like going back to the, hey, are we talking to champions? Are we talking to economic buyers? If our champion or our average, hands-on keyboard user is not seeing the value of Datadog early on, I think it's going to be harder and harder to get new accounts off the ground. So I think that'll always be kind of our key focus.
AI is really changing the way we interact with the world. And I think there's a lot of angst in marketing. It's like, how will my job look like 3 years from now, 5 years from now? How does the marketing team look like? We were interviewing someone earlier today, and she mentioned that, she's not really increasing the size of her team. And she's like, replace some roles with AI engineers on the marketing team. What is your opinion? Like, will the marketing team disappear? What are skills that are important? How should the current marketing person evolve their skill set to stay relevant?
Yeah, I don't think that marketing teams will disappear, but I do think they'll definitely morph and change, and the shapes of them will certainly change. I am always an optimist, and I think it'll only be for the positive. There's a lot of stuff that we do today that's redundant, that's not super gratifying, that I hope we'll continue to automate away. Like I always use this example with our brand team of resizing ads. Like I took an inventory of all of the asks that our brand team was getting, and like 30% of them were ad resizing. I mean, it's just like not what you want to do. You'd much rather be spending more time on like developing new creative for your event program, or thinking about, a new approach to your, video programs. So just something much more meaningful and high impact than resizing ads. And so I think across marketing teams, there's a number of examples of those kind of things that are just taken away from higher impact activities. I don't know exactly like what shape or form that'll take in terms of actual sub departments quite yet, but I do think you shouldn't just be, I don't know if I even want to say this out loud, but, you shouldn't just ask to increase the size of your team just for the sake of, all right, well, we were this many people last year, we need to be whatever percent larger. I do think the marketers that are not going to be as successful long-term in this world are kind of thinking about the same way of doing things. And as they've always done. And I think you have to really kind of like reset yourself and say, hey, all right, like if I had a like clean piece of paper, how would I build this org? And, how could I make certain functions more efficient? And how can I, get to that point over time without, sometimes people would, take drastic measures and do that over time, but what are the ways that we can kind of evolve into that model?
One of the ways that people are thinking about like sort of augmenting their team or their ability to tell the story out there is to generate community. And that kind of connects to the PLG story as well. Like how can we basically equip our users to go sell on our behalf? And I'm curious how that's worked in your past roles and your current role. And is that a trend that is also going to be durable?
I think absolutely. I think that that's probably one of the teams that I don't want to say won't change at all, but I think that that is something that's really hard to replicate with AI. And that for some of the reasons you're saying, like people can sniff that out if it doesn't feel like, if they feel like a bot's responding to them and not someone who's actually using a product or really deeply understands their point of view. I think that that's going to be hard. I think, on the flip side, I do think that there's things we can do to empower our community users to move faster with AI than maybe they could in the past. I do think, again, it depends on how people consume your platform. At Twilio, I said a little bit of this before, but people would set up their app and then they might not touch Twilio for a number of years. So it was harder to build community in the sense of like user groups or kind of ongoing conversations just because people weren't thinking about Twilio every day. That's not to say we didn't have a very evangelical set of customers that loved talking about Twilio and how it had changed whatever they were working on or their department. But it wasn't as much of an ongoing conversation. At Datadog, it's much different. People are in and out of Datadog every day. They kind of live and die by it. And so in that sense, I think we have an opportunity and almost an obligation to make sure that we're connecting all these users, and especially at the local level too. I do think with AI, we can help do that faster, get them kind of content in a box, or get them set up with events quicker than we might have in the past without AI. And so I just think AI in that sense of creating user groups or community is only going to help you move faster and expand to other markets or cities too that you might not have gotten to otherwise.
Yeah, I think still fosters a great deal of the humanity around the brand and the people who are telling the story of the brand.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And then also just thinking about like what the future role of like CMOs are going to be. What do you think sort of this next generation of marketing leader is going to start looking like?
I think that you are going to have to be creative and savvy around what the shape of your team looks like, how you can make it as productive as possible while keeping the things that make your brand authentic. So I think you've got to have kind of one foot in that brand world and brand mindset, and also be thinking about content and how that comes across in an authentic way, but also thinking about, all right, how can I take 30% of what my team's doing, offload it to AI, and then recalibrate them to focus on more kind of higher value activities.
Yeah, I love that you said that. I think that there's an interesting thread taking place mostly on Twitter right now around how the goal for a lot of marketing teams in 2026 is going to be about seizing attention and like creating these moments that have certain gravity to them and that have the authenticity that you just talked about. Are you thinking about like what are these sort of like more like bespoke moments that you can create out there in the world and what those might look like?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I always try to stress my team pre-AI or, within this era, like you have to make sure your marketing is memorable, especially, you drive down the 101 here in San Francisco and there are a million billboards. You can tell where a marketer has been involved. You can tell when like maybe a CFO was involved. You can tell when it's always kind of a fun drive for me to just see how people are messaging things. Yeah. And I mean, I'll take pictures of bus shelters on the walk I walked, down to my commute home. And there's always something that I'm like, I'll send it to my team and be like, this is what to do or this is what not to do. And like, can you tell me what this does? There's just you have about 2 lines of text to grab someone. And granted, I'm probably not the buyer for like 80% of these things that I'm seeing ads for. But I think that you always want to make sure that your marketing's memorable and that you're getting to, again, what pain you're solving. And that it's not just a nice to have with like a funny line on it.
Yeah. I think in particular about Ramp putting Kevin from The Office in the big glass box in Grand Central Station.
Yeah, totally.
And curious if we'll see more of that, you think, this year?
I mean, you have to find the balance. You don't want things to be like so distinctive that no one would ever do it. You know what I'm saying? Like there's a balance. But yeah, I do think like there's a lot of noise out there. There's a lot of people who are just trying to like come across as an established company. And so I think you have to think about, all right, what are the things that are going to resonate with my audience most importantly?
Yeah, to start there.
Yeah. And then try and think about, all right, what are some new ways to approach that?
So now we're approaching the end of the hour. Thank you so much for sharing all this insight with us. We're going to move into a lightning round where we're going to ask you rapid fire questions and just looking for whatever comes to mind for you.
Great.
This is obviously one that gets asked a lot right now, but what AI tool has actually changed your personal workflow as Sara?
I think, there's the obvious ChatGPT stuff, but like not even, I use it for work stuff and like, especially for internal like emails where I've got to do a summary of what's happened in the week. And like, I just want like a pithy title. And instead of spending half an hour on it for like an internal email, like that is a big, time saver.
And then in terms of dev tools marketing campaigns, like, are there any that come to mind that you just thought like, oh yeah, like when you are thinking about the 101 billboards, what have you seen where you're like, oh, so smart?
I've actually, I can't quote it, but I should have looked this up beforehand. But I like the a lot of the Work OS.
Oh yeah, those are good.
Billboards, like I'm always a fan of like simple copy, simple message, but something that's a little bit clever. And I think they strike the right balance.
Just like a little quirk.
Yeah. And the founder has been wearing shirts that say like, he's got like a Run DMC shirt that says like Run MCP, like, and he's been doing a lot of stuff in that vein that I just think, again, like simple stuff that kind of helps you like rise above the noise a bit. I can't remember the exact line for the billboard that I really like for Work OS, but it was just like a simple like, hey, we basically help upgrade your apps for enterprise. And it landed with me and stuck with me.
Yeah. I think it's good when they can just be really direct.
Yeah, exactly.
My question is, what do you think is, if you were us and you had the next guest in front of you, what is one question that you would ask them?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think it'd be interesting to get other people's perspective on like what they think 3 years, 5 years, at 10 years looks like down the road, see how things evolve. I think it's interesting because I think a lot of things will change and go to market broadly too. So there's a lot of things changing at once. So it's hard to know exactly how that will roll through to marketing. If you're talking to people outside of CMOs too, I think it'd just be interesting to kind of bring all that perspective together.
And the question from our previous guest is, what are you reading right now?
Oh, what am I reading?
It could be work-related or non-work related, but, to what are you reading to grow as a human?
To grow as a human, well, I try to read 2 books a month, which might sound low to some people, might sound high to others. I have 3 kids. So I'm proud that I'm at 2 books a month. I'm reading a book called Atmosphere right now that was recommended on, TikTok or something. A lot of friends, I always actually every year on Facebook, I post like, hey, tell me what you're reading. And I get a lot of good recommendations from a broad group of friends. So that's always kind of fun to collate. I just read on the work side, I just read a book called, again, I'm on Instagram too much, but it's called Balance is Bullshit. Sorry for swearing on your
Balance is bullshit. I agree with that.
And it was just it was a woman whose daughter is actually like a travel influencer. She was the mom was a exec at Nordstrom for a long time. It was just interesting to hear her story and just how she kind of balances family life and taking care of herself and a really high impact time consuming role. I don't know. It's just, I felt like it was nothing you could tell she was an operator. She'd been in it. It wasn't like anything too out there, ivory towery. And so I enjoyed it.
What's something that you're just really excited about going forward as you look at the year and think about your planning and your team? What's exciting?
I mean, I'm not just saying this because you just asked me a bunch of questions on AI, but I am really excited to see how we take on more AI within our marketing team. I also think we have a lot of interesting products on the AI front from a Datadog perspective, which are very fun to market. Everything from agents within our core product to LLM observability, which we sell more we sell it to a wide range of customers, but it's especially attractive to some of the startup audience, which is fun to market to, and just that market's moving and changing so dynamically that it's really fun to be engaged there too. So I feel like I'm super lucky to have the role I have and to get to engage with all these different types of customers. So I'm excited.
Well, we're excited to watch what you do with Datadog, and we're just so excited that you joined us today. So thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Sarah. Really appreciate having you.
Thanks for listening. If you found this conversation valuable, help more people find the show.
Hit subscribe so you don't miss future episodes, rate, review, or share with a colleague who may be navigating the same challenges.
Want to dive deeper? Head to fom.xyz for show notes, resources, and more. See you next time.